I sat alone in my apartment, the invitation I never received heavy in the air. 2 nights ago, my father had called, not to invite me, but to make sure I understood. "You're a worthless daughter. Don't come home," he said, his voice cold and final. No explanation, no hesitation. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I simply said, "All right," and hung up. It wasn't like I hadn't seen it coming. For years, I had watched my sister Laura bathe in their affection while I became little more than an afterthought. Laura, the one with the perfect life, the bright future, the successful relationship. I was just there, useful when needed, invisible when not. Still, hearing the words out loud carved a hollow space inside me that I couldn't immediately fill. The next morning, scrolling through social media, I stumbled upon the event. "Happy birthday to the best dad." Laura had posted pictures of decorations, tables set for dozens, and even a banner across the yard. Everyone was going to be there. Aunts, uncles, cousins, everyone except me. I set down my phone, the screen still glowing beside me, and stared at the wall. They wanted a celebration without me? Fine. They would have one. I picked up the phone and made a single call. No anger, no revenge in my voice, just cold, methodical precision. By evening, my plans were already in motion. When the day of the party arrived, I dressed simply. A navy dress, sensible heels. Nothing flashy. I wasn't planning on making a scene. I just needed to be there, quietly, watching. As I parked down the street and walked toward the house, my stomach twisted, not with fear, but with something sharper. Resignation, maybe, or the final crumbling of hope I'd clung to for too long. The yard buzzed with laughter and clinking glasses. Through the open windows, I could hear Laura's high-pitched laugh, the golden child, shining as always. I kept to the edges, unnoticed, until someone noticed. It was Laura's boyfriend, Carter, tall, broad-shouldered, confident, who spotted me first. His eyes widened in shock. He stepped forward, hand extended, and said loudly, so everyone could hear, "Good afternoon, boss." The yard fell silent. Glasses froze midway to mouths, heads turned. Even Laura went pale. I smiled, polite but detached, because none of them knew. None of them had any idea what had happened since the last time they dismissed me as worthless. The silence stretched longer than it should have, seconds ticking by, heavy and expectant. Carter, still holding his hand out, faltered as he looked around, realizing he'd dropped a bomb he hadn't meant to. My father, still gripping his glass of bourbon, narrowed his eyes. Laura's mother-in-law whispered something sharply to her husband. Laura herself blinked, as if trying to reboot her perfect, curated reality. And me? I smiled politely, as if this awkwardness had nothing to do with me. "Good to see you, Carter," I said, shaking his hand firmly. "Enjoying yourself?" He stammered something about the wonderful setup, but his eyes flickered nervously between me and Laura. "Boss?" My father repeated finally, his voice flat, dangerous. "Since when do you call her boss?" Carter opened his mouth, closed it again, then looked to me, silently begging for direction. I saved him, for now. "I think it's best if we don't interrupt the celebration," I said, turning to the gathering crowd with the smoothness I had learned over the past 2 years. "This is a family event, after all." But the damage was done. The seed had been planted, and already it was growing like a weed through the cracks of their perfect party. The rest of the afternoon, I lingered at the edges. I accepted a glass of wine, exchanged pleasantries with distant relatives who barely remembered my name. All the while, I watched the whispers ripple through the guests like wildfire. Who was she now? What had they missed? By the time the cake was brought out, my father couldn't stand it anymore. He cornered Carter near the buffet table, speaking in a low, angry hiss that carried easily across the quiet backyard. "Explain, now." Carter, sweating despite the cool afternoon breeze, spoke quickly. I started working at Marston & Company 6 months ago. She's the CEO." The words hit harder than any slap could have. My father's face drained of color. Laura, standing nearby, gasped audibly. Marston & Company, the very firm my father had once laughed at when I first interviewed there, saying it was beneath our family name. The same company that, unbeknownst to them, had skyrocketed under my leadership. I finished my wine slowly, savoring the moment. Not out of cruelty, but because for the first time in years, I felt the weight shifting. Not dramatically, not loudly, quietly, irrevocably. Later, as I set my glass down and prepared to leave, Laura rushed after me, grabbing my arm. "Why didn't you tell us?" she demanded, voice trembling with hurt and anger. I looked at her, truly looked, and for the first time in my life, saw her clearly, not as the golden child, not as the one who had it all, but as someone desperately clinging to a story where I had always been less. "Because," I said quietly, "you never asked." I left them standing there, stunned, as the sun began to set on a party that was no longer about celebration, but about realization. I didn't sleep much that night. Even after I returned home, changed out of my navy dress, and washed the lingering scent of wine and grass from my skin, I couldn't shake the restless energy. Memories flooded back. Birthdays where Laura's gifts were showered with praise while mine were forgotten. Holidays where I was the one cooking, cleaning, making everything perfect, only to be dismissed like a servant. It wasn't just the party. It was every year before it, and now their golden world had cracked, and I knew my father wouldn't let it go. Sure enough, the next morning, my phone rang before 8. His name flashed across the screen. Dad. For a moment, I just stared at it. There was a time, long ago, when seeing his name would have made me feel proud, loved, chosen. Now, it only made me tired. I answered calmly. "Hello." There was no greeting, only cold fury. "What game are you playing?" he barked. I remained silent, letting him fill the space. Showing up uninvited, making a scene, embarrassing me in front of everyone. What the hell were you thinking? His voice, once the center of my universe, now sounded small, petty. "I didn't make a scene," I said evenly. "I attended quietly. It's not my fault if you were surprised by who I am now." "You've changed," he spat. No, I'd always been this person. They had just never cared enough to see her. "You never once told me you got some big promotion, some fancy title," he said accusingly, as if my success was a betrayal. "I wasn't obligated to," I replied. There was a stunned silence. Then, "You think you're better than us now, don't you?" I closed my eyes, tired of the same script. "No, Dad," I said quietly. "I just stopped trying to prove I was good enough for you." He hung up without another word. I set the phone down and went to the window, looking out over the city skyline. It had been my companion for the last 3 years, during long, lonely nights of building a career, healing old wounds, and eventually finding myself again. They thought they had discarded me. But I had been growing, slowly, quietly, away from their gaze. Later that day, Carter sent a message. "I'm sorry about yesterday. I didn't mean to out you like that. If you need anything, let me know." I almost laughed. Out me? I hadn't hidden. They just hadn't looked. I responded simply, "Thank you, don't worry. Everything's exactly how it should be." But I knew it wasn't over. People like my father didn't accept being made fools of easily. There would be consequences. And this time, I wouldn't hide. I was done playing small. The retaliation came faster than I thought. 2 days later, I received an email from HR. A formal inquiry had been filed against me, an anonymous complaint accusing me of abuse of power and nepotism. At first, I was stunned, then furious. The accusations were laughable. I had worked my way up at Marston and Company starting from a junior analyst position, often working 16-hour days, taking every project no one else wanted. No family name had carried me. No shortcuts had been given. And yet, here it was, a neatly worded attempt to discredit everything I had built. I didn't need to ask who was behind it. My father was many things, but subtle wasn't one of them. I sat at my desk, the skyline glittering behind me, and let the anger pass through. Then I opened my records. Every promotion, every award, every leadership program I had completed, all documented. I crafted a response so thorough, so calm, so ironclad that by the end of the week, the HR team not only dismissed the complaint, but formally apologized for the inconvenience. Still, the message was clear. My father wasn't just angry. He was at war. Meanwhile, Laura reached out again. First a text. "Can we talk? I feel like everything's falling apart." Then a voicemail, voice shaking. "I didn't know you were doing so well. I thought you needed us." Needed them. The words stung more than I expected. There had been a time when I did need them, desperately, but not anymore. Still, part of me hesitated. Laura wasn't my father. Her betrayal had been softer, almost unintentional. The slow, grinding dismissal of my worth over years, disguised as concern, pity, and sisterly advice. I agreed to meet her. Neutral ground, a quiet coffee shop, far from family eyes. When she walked in, I barely recognized her. Gone was the polished, confident sister who had always looked effortlessly perfect. Laura looked fragile. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her movements uncertain. She sat down, fiddling nervously with her ring. "I didn't know you were suffering," she said finally. I leaned back, studying her. "You didn't want to know," I corrected gently. She flinched but didn't argue. I always thought you were content," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "I never realized you were hurting so much." I sipped my coffee slowly, because it was easier for everyone if I stayed invisible. Tears welled up in her eyes, but I felt no satisfaction in seeing them, only a deep, bone-weary sadness. She reached across the table. "Maybe we can fix things," she said. "Maybe it's not too late." I didn't move. "Maybe," I said softly, "but you need to understand something." She looked at me, hopeful. "I'm not coming back to the way things were," I said. "Not ever." Because the girl they had pushed aside was gone. And the woman who had replaced her wasn't going to beg for scraps of love anymore. I didn't hear from my father after the HR debacle, but silence from him was never a good sign. It meant he was planning something. Meanwhile, Laura tried harder. Over the next week, she sent text messages, left voicemails, even mailed a handwritten note, something so rare it almost made me laugh. She wrote about childhood memories, baking cookies together, playing in the backyard, whispering secrets under the covers when we were supposed to be asleep. I read every word carefully. There was honesty there, but also a deep refusal to acknowledge the full truth. She remembered the laughter. She didn't mention the loneliness, the subtle cruelties, the endless comparisons. It wasn't enough. At work, things stayed smooth on the surface, but small cracks appeared. A client I had long-standing ties with suddenly pulled a contract without explanation. A quiet investigation revealed that someone had sent them an anonymous packet, old photos, outdated news articles twisting minor incidents into scandals, all framed to look like I was unstable, untrustworthy. The fingerprints were obvious. My father had friends in low places, and he wasn't above dirty tactics to reclaim what he thought he had lost: control. I didn't panic. I gathered my evidence, secured the remaining contracts, called in personal favors I had earned over years of loyal work. I spent hours on damage control, cleaning up the mess he thought would break me. Instead, it sharpened me. Meanwhile, Carter requested a meeting. In person. We sat at a small bar after work, the air thick with the smell of whiskey and old wood. "I'm sorry," he said again, running a hand through his hair. "I never realized how bad it was for you. Laura always talked about how close your family was." I smiled bitterly. People believe the stories that are easier to hear. He hesitated, then leaned in, voice low. "Your father, he's talking to some of my colleagues. Digging. Trying to ruin you." I sipped my drink, feeling nothing but a cold, clean certainty settle inside me. "I know," I said, "and I'm ready." Carter looked at me carefully. "You're not planning to just survive this, are you?" I met his gaze directly. "No," I said. "I'm planning to end it." Because survival wasn't enough anymore. It wasn't just about withstanding their blows. It was about making sure they could never hurt me again. And if that meant burning every false memory, every illusion they still clung to, so be it. I didn't rush my next move. If there was one thing I'd learned, it was that timing mattered more than brute force. I spent the next few days gathering pieces: old financial records, dusty family business documents, emails I hadn't looked at in years. Things that, at the time, seemed insignificant. Now, in the new light, they painted a much darker picture. It wasn't just emotional neglect my family had inflicted. There were real betrayals, things that had shaped the course of my life without my consent. I found the confirmation in an old email thread. My application to a prestigious scholarship program had been withdrawn, not by me, but by my father, who had claimed family emergencies required me to stay home. I had believed him at the time. I thought it was true. It wasn't. There was no emergency. There was only his belief that Laura deserved the spotlight and I could serve quietly in the background. I printed the emails, highlighting every betrayal, not because I needed proof for anyone else, but because I needed to see it, laid bare. Laura texted again. "Dad's planning something. I heard him talking about you. Be careful." For once, her warning didn't carry a demand for loyalty, an expectation that I forgive and forget. It was just worry. Real, human worry. Still, she wasn't ready to choose sides. Not yet. I responded simply, "I know. Thank you." Meanwhile, Carter came by my office with an update. "He's reaching out to some sketchy law firms," he said, frowning. "Trying to dig up dirt, make something stick." I leaned back in my chair, studying the city lights through the window. "Let him try," I said. Because I had nothing to hide anymore. That night, I made the decision I had been circling for weeks. I wasn't just going to defend myself. I wasn't going to sit back and react. I was going to make sure he, and the rest of the family, saw who I had become, and what they had thrown away. I called Laura. "I need you to meet me," I said. There was hesitation on her end, but then, "Okay." We met at a small park, the sun just beginning to set. I handed her a file folder. Inside, everything: the withdrawn scholarship, the erased job references, the subtle sabotage that had kept me tethered to the family far longer than I should have been. She flipped through the papers, her hands trembling. "I didn't know," she whispered, voice cracking. "I know you didn't," I said, "but you benefited from it." She started to cry, but I didn't reach out. Not yet. "You can keep pretending it was all an accident," I said quietly, "or you can finally admit that our family was never what you believed it was." Laura looked up at me, her face crumbling under the weight of truth. And for the first time, I saw it. A fracture running straight through her polished surface. A crack that could no longer be ignored. Laura sat frozen on the park bench, the folder trembling in her hands. For a long moment, she said nothing. The setting sun threw long shadows across the grass, making everything look fractured, just like us. I don't know what to say," she whispered finally. I stayed silent, letting her sit with it, letting her feel it without rushing to comfort her, because that's what had always happened before. Someone would cry, someone would panic, and I would rush in, smoothing things over, swallowing my hurt so that others wouldn't have to look at it. Not anymore. "I can't believe he did this," she said, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I can't believe he sabotaged you like that." I gave a small, tired smile. "You don't want to believe it," I corrected her. "But deep down, you've always known something wasn't right." She flinched, but didn't deny it. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Finally, she looked at me, desperate. "Please, please don't tear the family apart." I met her eyes steadily. "I'm not tearing anything apart, Laura," I said. "I'm just refusing to hold it together by myself anymore." Because that's what I had been doing for years, patching over their lies with my silence, stitching up their betrayals with my forgiveness. I stood. "You have a choice," I said quietly. "You can keep pretending, or you can help me bring everything into the light. But either way, I'm done pretending." Laura stood too, clutching the folder against her chest like a shield. "I need time," she said, voice cracking. "I've given you years," I replied. "Take the time you need, but don't expect me to wait for you." I turned and walked away, feeling the weight lift off my shoulders with every step. The next day, I made my move. I requested a meeting with my father, formal, public. At a country club he loved, One of those places where reputation meant everything. He agreed, probably thinking he could shame me into silence on neutral ground. He didn't realize that nothing he could say now could ever silence me again. When I arrived, he was already there, sitting at a table near the window, sipping whiskey, wearing his best smile, the one he used for negotiations and newspaper photos. I sat down across from him, calm, collected. "Well?" he said, spreading his arms wide. "Come to apologize?" I smiled slightly. "No," I said. "I came to return the favor." He frowned, sensing something wrong, but too arrogant to understand it yet. I pulled out the folder and placed it on the table between us. "This," I said softly, "is everything you did to make sure I would never outshine Laura, everything you did to keep me small." He paled, but kept his smile frozen in place. "Don't be dramatic," he said dismissively. "Families make sacrifices." I leaned in slightly. "No," I said. "You made sacrifices. I was the sacrifice." His hand twitched toward the folder, but I placed my hand lightly on top of it. "This isn't just for me," I said. "It's for every lie you ever told. To me, to Laura, to everyone. It's over now." The waiter came by, asking if we needed anything else. I smiled politely. "No, thank you. We're done here." I stood and left him sitting there, trapped in the ruins of his own making. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel guilty for walking away. I thought my father would come after me harder after that meeting. But for the first time in my life, he stayed silent. No angry calls, no smear campaigns, nothing. At first, I wondered if he was gathering strength for a bigger strike. But as the days passed, it became clear. He wasn't planning anything. He was drowning, stripped of the image he had so carefully cultivated, the proud father, the successful patriarch. He had nothing left to fight with. Without control, he was just a man sitting alone at a country club, nursing a drink and a lifetime of broken illusions. Laura, however, wasn't done. She called me 2 nights after the confrontation, her voice shaking. "I confronted him," she said. I stayed silent, letting her speak. I asked him about the scholarship, about everything. He didn't even deny it. Her voice cracked. "He said it was for the best, that you were always too fragile, too emotional to succeed without intervention." I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the words wash over me. I had spent years fighting that lie, that there was something wrong with me, something broken that justified how they treated me. But it had never been true. "Are you still pretending he did it out of love?" I asked gently. Laura broke into sobs on the other end of the line. "No," she whispered. "Not anymore." It should have felt like a victory. Instead, it felt like standing over the ashes of something that had once mattered. "I'm sorry," she said between gasps. "I'm sorry I didn't see it. I'm sorry I let it happen." I swallowed hard. "I know," I said. "But sorry doesn't fix it. Because some damage can't be undone. Only acknowledged." She begged me to come to a family dinner she was planning, one where everything would be laid bare, no lies, no fake smiles. An attempt at healing. I hesitated. Part of me wanted to stay away, to never look back. But another part knew. Some endings needed witnesses. I agreed, under one condition. "I'm not coming to make peace," I said. "I'm coming to tell the truth, whether anyone likes it or not." Laura agreed. The night of the dinner, I stood outside our childhood home, the place where every slight, every dismissal, every invisible wound had been born. I walked up the familiar steps and rang the doorbell. Laura opened the door, her face pale but determined. Inside, the dining room was set as if for a holiday. White tablecloth, candles, too much silverware. An illusion of normalcy they were already struggling to maintain. My father sat at the head of the table, his mouth a hard, thin line. My mother beside him, wringing her hands. Distant relatives, a few cousins, all summoned for this final performance. I took my seat calmly, my heart steady. Because I wasn't the girl begging for a place at the table anymore. I was the woman who had built her own. And tonight, the truth would finally be spoken, whether they could bear it or not. The clink of silverware and the low murmur of conversation filled the dining room, but a heavy tension sat over the table like a storm cloud. Everyone kept glancing at me, quick, furtive looks, as if I might explode at any moment. My father avoided my eyes altogether, pretending to be engrossed in his drink. My mother, pale and drawn, picked at her plate but barely touched the food. Laura sat beside me, her face tight with nerves but determined. I waited. I wasn't here to start a fight. I was here to tell the truth. And when the moment came, when the small talk faltered and the silence became impossible to ignore, I set down my glass and spoke. "I'm not here to pretend everything is fine," I said, voice calm but carrying through the room. "I'm here because this family spent decades building a version of me that was convenient. A scapegoat, a failure, someone who could never be allowed to succeed." Some gasped quietly. Others, mostly the cousins, who had always been distant spectators, looked away awkwardly. I looked straight at my father. "You made sure of it," I said. "You sabotaged my opportunities. You undermined my achievements. You lied about what I was capable of." He opened his mouth, perhaps to deny it, perhaps to belittle it. But Laura spoke before he could. "It's true," she said, her voice clear and trembling at once. "I saw the proof. She showed me." The room went dead silent. My father glared at her as if she were a traitor. My mother burst into tears, whispering, "Why are you doing this? Why now?" "Because lies rot everything they touch," I said quietly, "and I won't live under them anymore." One uncle, my father's younger brother, shifted uncomfortably. "Families have tensions," he said, trying to smooth things over. "You shouldn't air dirty laundry." I smiled, not kindly. "This isn't dirty laundry," I said. "It's the truth, and I'm not ashamed of it." My father slammed his glass down. "You're nothing without us," he barked, the polished mask finally cracking. "You think you built that life yourself? You owe everything to the way we raised you." I stood slowly, calm despite the venom in his voice. "You didn't raise me," I said. "You buried me. I dug myself out." I turned to the room. "I'm done carrying the shame you tried to give me. I'm done pretending this family is something it's not. You don't have to like me. You don't even have to believe me, but you will not silence me." I set the folder with the evidence, the emails, the letters, the lies, down in the center of the table. "If you ever doubt what happened," I said, "read it for yourselves." And then I left, walking out the front door into the cold night air, free. Behind me, I heard shouting, anger, denial, accusations. But I didn't turn back. I had already buried the past. Now I was walking into the future, mine alone. The night air was cool and sharp, carrying the scent of autumn leaves. Each step away from that house felt lighter, easier, as if I were shedding invisible chains I hadn't even realized I was still wearing. I didn't drive straight home. Instead, I parked by the old river path and walked along the water, letting the moonlight wash over me. For the first time in my life, there was no voice in my head second-guessing, apologizing, shrinking. Only quiet, only peace. My phone buzzed once in my pocket. It was a message from Laura. "I'm sorry. I believe you. I hope someday you can forgive me." I stood there, reading it under the stars. No anger, no bitterness. Just a sad, simple understanding. Forgiveness wasn't something I owed. It was something I could choose, if and when I was ready. I typed back, "I believe you're trying. Take care of yourself." It wasn't closure tied up in a neat bow. It wasn't a dramatic reunion. It was real, messy, complicated, human, and it was enough. As for my father, I heard through Carter weeks later that things had begun unraveling quickly. Old business partners pulling away, friends whispering behind closed doors. Not because I exposed him publicly. I hadn't needed to. Truth, once released, had a way of eroding even the strongest lies from the inside. I didn't celebrate his downfall. I didn't watch from the sidelines. I simply moved on. At Marston and Company, I threw myself into new projects. Real ones, the kind that built futures, not facades. I mentored younger women climbing the same ladders I once struggled up alone. I traveled when I wanted to. I bought my own house overlooking the river, a quiet, strong place that was entirely mine. And sometimes, rarely but sometimes, I thought about the girl I used to be. The one who had once stood at that family dinner table, desperate for a seat, desperate to be seen. I grieved for her, but I didn't mourn, because she hadn't been weak. She had been waiting for the day she would stop asking for permission to exist, waiting for the day she would finally, fully belong to herself. And that day had come. As the sun rose over the river, casting gold across the water, I smiled, not for anyone else, not to prove anything, just for me. Because after everything, I had built a life where I didn't have to beg to be loved. I loved myself enough to stay free, and that was more than enough.